Thank you, Mr. Hattori. So I would like to add some comments, especially from the view of the private sector. So I will share the slide. Just a moment, please. Yes, I think that as Dr. Santa Maria's explanation shows us how the APEC's ambitious plan depends on the activities engagement of the private sector. So APEC has a very unique structure. One is that APEC leaders established the APEC Business Advisory Council, ABAC, in November 1995. Very long history we have. So ABAC is the private sector's arm of APEC. Its main mandate is to advise leaders and other APEC officials on the issues of the interest to businesses. So this private sector body presents recommendations to APEC leaders in annual dialogue and advise APEC officials on business sector priorities and concerns. APEC members meet 4 times per year. And so APEC representatives also attend senior officials meetings, the annual ministerial meetings, and the sectoral ministerial meetings. So today, I would like to introduce the APEC's activity. Yeah, that's the first is I will focus on the APEC covers many important issues in APEC, but today I would like to focus on the regional economic integrations. So I'd like to explain what we did in last year, and so what we would like to do in this year. The first page is what we did in last year. So achievements FTAP remains APEC's preeminent priority for regional economic integration of the APEC regions, and as the heart of the full realization of the Putrajaya Vision. Today, I would like to briefly introduce our contribution in regard to FTAP, which is one of APEC's major priorities. First, prioritize areas for early progress toward an eventual FTAP, where APEC has fallen short of achieving the Bogor goals. For example, agriculture, non-tariff barriers, service, and investments. Second, incorporate business priorities focusing on next generational trade and investment issues, so-called NGETI, and to promote further liberalization and to enhance the resilience of global value chains. And third, we commit to achieving FTAP by continuing to progress the negotiating pathways, including through future accession, in order to deliver the expansion and convergence in the region of mutually agreed and coherent rules and high standards for trade in both goods and services, as well as investment. And so secondly, I'd like to introduce what we would like to do in this year. The issue to be included in this year's recommendations. At first, we'd like to emphasize the importance of maintaining and improving the quality of existing agreements as pathway agreements. We should create high quality and high standard rules through convergence by adapting what works best from these trade agreements. In addition, we recommend that regular monitoring be conducted on the problems, issues, and the implementation status of the existing free trade agreements in the Asia-Pacific region to improve the quality of the existing agreements. So we would like to emphasize the importance of expanding the pathway agreements by encouraging interested economies as new entrants, giving top priority to maintain and improving the quality of trade agreements required by the market. Now, let's look at the rules in the e-commerce chapter. It is important that we expand convergence or adapt higher quality international rules based on data free flow with trust, including in the e-commerce chapter of free trade agreements in the Asia-Pacific region. We find it very important to globalize women and MSMEs to gain a better economic recovery from the negative effects of the pandemic it is particularly essential to encourage women and MSMEs to enter global supply chains by making wider use of innovation and through the successor initiative to the Bogor Boracay Action Agenda. To globalize MSMEs, which we highly recommend. And so to prepare for another large-scale infection disease outbreaks, we call for the conclusion of the framework that reduce government restrictions on the trade of such medical products as personal protective equipment, among other, including vaccines. It is important to take appropriate measures to deal with climate change issues. The CPTPP has an environmental chapter, but it focuses only on the cooperation, while RCEP doesn't include anything on the environment. Negotiations on the environment of goods is now underway at the WTO, we understand, but not all APEC members are participating in that negotiation. It is hoped that APEC members will actively address environmental issues within the framework of trade agreements or in some other ways, I think. Thank you for sharing your precious time. Thank you.
Thank you, Imamura-san, for those comments. And we always appreciate the APEC's activity for APEC ongoing activities, including FTAP and many other important issues related to business. Let me invite Rebecca to respond to his comments.
Thank you very much, Imamura-san. You know, I know how passionate the APEC members are about FTAP, and they really want to see us making progress. And I think one of the important areas, if we are to make progress on FTAP, one is we must deal with the next generation trade and investment issues, and that was mentioned by Imamura-san. You know, what are these trade in this next generation? These are state-owned enterprises. These are labor rights, environment. These are traditionally not included in your FTAs. So if you look at the FTAs that ASEAN, for example, has with Japan or among ASEAN members, and RCEP, for example, which is a pathway to FTAP. Even RCEP, which was one of the more recent trade agreements, the next generation trade of investment issues are touched on, but not dived into. So if they've put it there as a work in progress, you know, it's part of your work plan, work program. Whereas CPTPP has these embedded. Even so, parties to the agreement have taken exceptions. So they have taken exceptions on some of these new issues. So the value that APEC then brings to the table, because we are a non-binding forum, we can have those very difficult discussions, you know, when we meet, because, you know, it is not negotiating. We're not negotiating. We're talking about how to include these new trade and investment issues into an agreement. So that, and if we have some members who are less confident about you know, who have some concerns about including this, we then have our capacity building pillar to help our members, our policymakers appreciate the importance of some of these. I remember when we first started, you know, when we first started our trade agreements, we refused, when I say we, I'm saying Malaysia, we refused to talk about environment and labor. But today we know that we go into these trade agreements, we cannot avoid discussing these matters. You need to have them. E-commerce, you need to have them. You need to have the rules for this. So in that sense, we are aware of the importance of this, and it's equally important that the private sector keeps reminding policymakers of this. You know, the role of policymakers, Imamura-san, I'm sure you're aware, we get all these requests and concerns highlighted to us, but at the end of the day, we need to find the balance. You know, for every Imamura-san who wants the next generation issues included, there will be another party that says, oh, excuse me, we are not ready. So the policymaker needs to find that balance. But the role of the private sector then is to keep convincing us why it matters. And I think that's the importance of having that dialogue. And for me also, when we have dialogues with the private sector, it's about concrete proposals. It is high level, sometimes doesn't cut it. You need to be more concrete, so that then the policymakers can start to work and think about how to include these concrete discussions into the policies and into the next steps that they are taking.
Thank you. Imamura-san, any feedback or any comments before moving to the questions from the audience?
Okay, thanks. This opportunity. Yeah, I would like to add some comments. I attended the last month in Singapore. That's the APEC's first meeting. This is the first time for me. This is very interesting, warm, and so the good atmosphere. I felt that. I also understand that we already achieved AOSEP and CPTPPs, but still I understand that it's very difficult condition to improve more, especially for environmental or the so-called energetic issues. And also now we have some so-called some Russian issues we have, but we have all the common ground in the business sector. So making consensus or most inclusive pathway is we could achieve. I understand. This is APEC's very unique position, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Imamura-san, for those comments. And let's move to the questions from the audience. The first question is that with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, will APEC be able to maintain momentum for cooperation?
Concerns that we face in APEC. This is not the first time the region is facing adversity. The last couple of years, you've seen how we've had issues, where even at the leaders level, we couldn't have statements or joint declarations. It was difficult, but we came back. We came back. It wasn't like because that 1 year we couldn't have a leader's statement, because at that time, if you recall, it was not Russia, but it was China and US. We couldn't get to a consensus statement, but it didn't mean that APEC died off. We got back together. We worked together. We continued the dialogue, and despite the differences, we managed to get through that very challenging period. And then there was COVID. Again, at one point, folks were saying, oh, because of COVID, we're all going to look very inward. Nobody's going to be bothered about the neighbor. They were very focused internally. But you saw what happened was we came together, our customs authorities, I keep repeating it because I'm very proud of them, of the work that they did. They focused on how they could ensure that goods could flow. Trade is not a one economy story. You can't do trade by yourself. You need your partners, and you need to make sure that you can flow. The rules, the regulations, the facilities must be able to do that. And we managed that. We focus. And now the resumption of travel, which is very close to the heart of APEC also, I know, we are doing that. So we've had experience. But what's happening now in Europe, of course, we are concerned. Of course, we are monitoring the developments as they unfold. We have noted that some economies have stated their own positions. Some member economies have got together and made their own statements and all that. We understand that, and like I said, we are a non-binding organization, 1. 2, we are an economic, above everything else, we are an economic body. So our mandate really is to advance the economic agenda for Asia Pacific, prosperity for members. So what we'll do is this, like I said, this is unprecedented for APEC. We're all watching and hoping that the situation will get better. APEC has always been the place where economies sit together and engage in dialogue, even when we have such difficult things to discuss. So we are hoping that, member economies, the leaders, will be able to get together and have those very, very difficult conversations. So anyway, in the meantime, we keep monitoring the situation.
Some related question from the second one. I think APEC is a unique economic cooperation framework in which the United States, China, and Russia are members. Is there any move to persuade Russia as an APEC following Russia's invasion of Ukraine from February 24th?
Well, like I said, we are monitoring the situation. And, I must say that APEC as an entity is member driven. And also the chair of APEC takes on a very significant role. And I know I had a conversation with the chair, the SOM chair, the senior official of Thailand, who's chairing APEC this year, that they are also keeping track of this, and they are having engagements with the relevant folks to see how we can, as one entity, have a response to what is happening on the ground.
Yeah, thank you very much for those answers. The third question is about Japan. Since APEC was created by the initiative of Japan and Australia, I think Japan has a great responsibility for APEC's role. What role do you expect Japan to play as the executive director of APEC?
Yes, Japan has a key role because it is a founding member, just as Australia, just as Malaysia was a founding member of APEC. Every one of us has a role, and really it's about focusing on how we can support each other. I keep talking about us as economies that provide the tailwinds for our trade and investment as opposed to the headwinds. So each of us has a role, and I think from my experience, Japan has played a significant role, has been very collaborative in the work that we've been doing the last couple of years when it has been very challenging. And from the perception survey also, we see that, there is general support for APEC from the Japanese respondents to our survey.
Thank you. Next question. Please tell us more about empowerment of women, important, using digital technologies which you have mentioned, please. You are muted again.
I'm muted, sorry about that. One of the key areas, I mentioned to you that we have this dashboard that helps us to track women's economic integration, women's economic empowerment. One key area, let me just quickly inform you what are the key areas that we look at when we look at women's economic empowerment. One is access to capital and markets. The other is access to markets itself. Then skills, capacity building, and health. So we're having a competition on healthy women. And the fourth is leadership, voice, and agency. This is about representation in the highest places, whether it's in government or in the private sector. And the last one is what we just introduced the last year or so, is innovation and technology. Now, when we were looking at this aspect of women's empowerment in this area and integration of women through the use of innovation technology, what we found was it was a challenge to do that analysis, partly because of the lack of data. So this is one area we will be taking forward, because it is a challenge to get segregated data, to see how access to technology, access to broadband in areas. We have intuitively, we understand that women in the rural areas have less access or have a challenge getting access to broadband, for example. So that's intuitively, but we don't have enough data to support some of our arguments. So going forward, this is one area that we will need to do more work on. Another area where we have done work is on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And very interestingly, there is a correlation between these two aspects, right? And what we're finding in some of our economies, there's a higher percentage of women or girls in STEM than in some other economies, so, and then women graduates in these areas. So clearly we have done some work, but we haven't done enough. So and with the work that we're doing under our own digital economy steering group, will be one area of focus, as well as the policy partnership for women's empowerment. These are two important working groups that we have in APEC that will be looking at these areas. I know I haven't answered your question fully, but it gives you some indication that this is pretty much a work in progress.
Yeah, there are more things to discuss about this matter, certainly. But thank you very much for those comments. And this next question, I'm very interested in the digital rules in your lecture. Could you tell us more about APEC's digital rule-making efforts and challenges?
Yeah, again, thanks for that question. While we are not a rule-making body, I must stress that APEC is not a rule-making body, unlike the WTO, that actually makes rules. Even ASEAN, we can make some guidelines and rules and enforce them. APEC is voluntary. We can discuss it. We can provide examples and share best practices and hope to get to those rules. So let me give you an example. We have the CBPR, let me say, it's a privacy rules, yeah? And our rules are there. We have worked together as a group and come up with those rules, but it is not compulsory. It is not mandatory for each of the economies to implement. The cross-border privacy rule, CBPR. So we've done it and it's there, and member economies can opt to use them. So we have to date 9 economies that are using these rules. They align their domestic privacy rules, data privacy rules, with the ones that we have put up under APEC. Some economies are not subscribing to the CBPR because they don't have rules for privacy in their own economy, so they're developing it. But so in that case, they can use the CBPR as a basis when they are looking at their own domestic rule making. So that's how it is. So a lot more in terms of sharing, a lot more in terms of experience, building capacity, so folks, policymakers understand the value of what these rules will be, what benefit comes from making such rules, and having these rules not quite harmonized, but at least interoperable or harmonized across the region. There is that conversation that's going on.
Next question is bit want to hear more about the relation between empowerment of women and digital rules. I think you already touched upon those, but there are anything specific related to digital rules? Japan has done for the last couple of years about the APEC on empowerment of women projects and discussed various matters. And there are many points which we need to improve and the digital is one of the good area of promoting that. But could you?
Yeah, I think sometimes policymakers seem to have that impression that these are gender neutral, that these rules should apply across the board. But it's not about the rules being gender neutral, but it's about making sure that different parts of the population have an understanding of these rules and how these rules apply to them. And so when you have those rules, it is about making sure that there is no discriminatory aspect in those rules. So it is, but like I said earlier, one of our challenges is that we don't have enough data. So this is something that we are working on. For example, it's not just about women, they're also about the minority groups, things like that. We had a forum last year where we discussed about the economic empowerment, not just about women, but women from minority groups or groups that are less, I don't want to use the word vulnerable, but yeah, those groups. And one thing that came up over and over again is the lack of data. So the researchers, I know RIETI, you've got a bunch of researchers there. This is an area that is worth exploring. We need the data before we can make better informed rules and regulations.
Next question, concerning the strategy to adapt to the carbon neutral economy. Do you have any proactive action agenda or concrete initiatives to facilitate that process?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this area, while not focusing distinctly on carbon neutrality, but it's about sustainability, and that's a key part of the work this year under the Thai initiative, the biocircular economy. And as I shared with you, some of the projects that, let me just go back to that part. Let me just bring it. Some of the projects. So we have funding that we help economies do further work on. And one of this is in the area of sustainability, projects on managing sustainable development, energy transition. So there are aspects of the work that we do. So this is a new area, I must say, a developing area, and we will hear more of this year and going forward, especially with the Thai initiative towards the biocircular economy.
Thank you. If there are more questions from the audience, we are looking for that, but I would like to ask about the role of the APEC in more general things in the economic matters, like maybe beyond the economic matters. APEC Putrajaya Vision is now have not only trade and investment, but also innovation and digitalization, and the third drivers, strong, balanced, secure, sustainable, and inclusive growth. Are there anything APEC should adjust to the new visions? Do you think, is there anything we should kind of innovate ourselves to adjust to the new direction?
Thank you again, Hattori-san. When we were coming up with the vision, we spent a lot of time consulting. We had the vision group. We had a group of independent thinkers, experts, help us to think through where we saw APEC going in the future. And then we also had ABAC. ABAC too had input into this process. Also PEC, the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, they also provided input. So it was really a collective discussion, a collective piece of work that, you know, when we finally got to the vision, it was collective. You know, policymakers, think tanks, experts, business community, all sitting, putting their heads together to come up with these areas. And I must say, we did, you know, in a sense, anticipate the where APEC, the direction APEC should head. When you look at what we used to do in the past, it was really a focus on trade and investment. That was pretty much our focus. But today, we did a very timely inclusion of innovation and digitalization. And I must say, the whole issue of climate change was never quite on our agenda. So if you're looking at working groups in APEC, the structure of APEC itself, we don't have one group focused on climate change and trade, for example. You know, we have groups on women, we have groups on small and medium enterprises, on digitalization, on SMEs, but we do not have one just looking at the whole issue of sustainability. But sustainability cuts across a number of our working groups. So for example, when you're talking of small and medium enterprises, you cannot avoid talking about sustainability. The biocircular green economy comes into play there. Likewise, in digitalization, how will digitalization support this? So, you know, and then we have the Oceans and Fisheries Working Group. They focus on only one part of sustainability. You have the Energy Working Group, again, focusing on one part of it. So, you know, so what we need to do more of, Hattori-san, is really find a coordination across the different fora, so that we get a better picture of what we're doing for sustainability, in the area of climate change, in the area of inclusive growth. So we get a better picture of what's being done, so that, you know, we ensure that we're all coordinated. And because we do not have specific bodies looking at it, and I don't think you need to create one because it is a cross-cutting matter, we've decided at the Secretariat that we will do that. We have our program directors who look at the different fora, who are in charge of the different fora. So we have that conversation among ourselves to make sure that there is alignment in what we are doing, and not so much duplication, but really alignment and coordination across the different fora in APEC in this area. So if you're asking me if there's a gap, yes, there is, but there is a way of dealing with it.
Thank you very much for those comments. It's almost time, but Imamura-san, would you like to make the final words?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would add to emphasize that this timing is very difficult and the critical the challenge for the APEC, I think. But to maintain the APEC or maintain the momentum for the FTAP is very important at this time. So we'd like to contribute to the APEC activity by APEC. Thank you.
Thank you, Imamura-san, and thank you very much, Rebecca, for your participation. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.